Well, if you see the outline, you'll see that we are in Proverbs 31. A couple things going on. One, it's Mother's Day, so very beneficial to spend some time thanking all the mothers and wives who are here. And again, I think it's very good for us to go back and to begin to spend a little time looking at this, actually for a couple reasons. One, certainly we know that the Bible doesn't mention Mother's Day, and I could go back and give you a little information about Mother's Day. I didn't record any of that. I want to say by memory it started in 1908, but I'd have to actually go back and look that up. But at any point, we know that Mother's Day is actually, and it's celebrated by a few different countries under a few different names. And while the Bible doesn't spend any time talking about Mother's Day, we certainly can go back and look within our scriptures and we find where it does point out godly women and mothers. And I will say this, and I think it maybe would go along a little bit with, we're studying contentment. I think as we begin to look here in Proverbs 31, I think the image we have of the godly woman here in Proverbs 31, I think we find an awful lot of contentment with her. Not to suggest her life is easy, because as we look at the scriptures here, you'll see that it's not. But I think even though it's a hard life and an active life, I think we find a lot of contentment. And I think it'd be beneficial for us to maybe go back to this on Wednesday and spend some time here, even on Proverbs 31, as we talk about contentment. But again, the scriptures don't talk about Mother's Day, but they focus heavily on mothers, and they focus on godly women. And I do want to point out that, yes, there has been a severe cultural shift on gender and gender stereotypes within our society. However, if we go back and we look at the Bible has recorded for us the traits of women and mothers which are worthy of our esteem and gratefulness. And again, I think that this is a congregation where we have many women who are striving to try and meet this. It's good for us, again, to go back and spend some time. With that being said, if you go back and you begin to think about the role of godly mothers, of women, and you begin to look at all of the responsibilities that they have, it is a lot. Now, certainly we can do the same with fathers, and maybe we'll do that here in a few weeks, but there's an awful lot of responsibility for each mother and wife who is striving to be the person that God wants them to be. Listen to Proverbs 31:10, and then we'll actually come back and look at the entirety of this account. But it says, "Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies." Now, that's a great question. What exactly are the traits for one who is a virtuous woman, or one who is a woman with the heart of God, who wants to be very faithful? The scriptures say that the person that meets this criteria is more valuable than rubies. Well, for us to get an understanding of this, we need to actually go back and spend some time looking at the book of Proverbs. And again, Proverbs 31, most of you have heard this quite often. We have they will oftentimes say the virtuous woman, or it is the godly woman. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of information about this woman in Proverbs 31 before I actually look at the account, and I'll give you a little bit more. What do we know about this lady that is described here in Proverbs 31? 45 times we have feminine pronouns used in reference to this lady. I'm not going to go back and make a comparison upon all the craziness going on in our society today, but as we look here again at this lady within Proverbs 31, 45 times we see feminine pronouns used to refer to her. She's referred to as a wife, she's referred to as a mother, she's referred to as a daughter. And I could break down each of those roles, and we could spend time on that, because each of those roles in and of themselves is extremely important. And as we begin to look at this virtuous woman, or this godly woman, we find that in each of these roles, she's actually incorporating His standards into those three different roles as she's carrying out being a daughter and a wife and a mother. Now, many today would have you believe that this virtuous woman that we're going to look at here in Proverbs 31, she falls short in many areas at least as far as society or the culture today would have you to believe. And that is because many have tried to either downgrade or stigmatize as a whole women and roles traditionally held or carried out by women. And I was going to go back and spend some time on this, but I'm not. And the reason is I would say probably the majority of us as Christians would say, you know what, I really just don't even care anymore what the world says is right or what is not right. We realize that society has tried to change how people look at both men and women, and it's certainly attacked the home and women, both wives and mothers. And so as we begin to look at this person here in Proverbs 31, this virtuous woman, I want to point out that she doesn't appear at all to be ashamed of who she is and what it is that she's doing for her family and the role that she is carrying out. In no way do we find that she has the appearance of shame. As a matter of fact, what we find is she carries herself in such a way that even though today's world would stigmatize her role, but she carries herself in such a way that she is esteemed by everyone around her. And not only is she esteemed by everyone around her, she is literally doing anything and everything she can to support her family, and as we look, those around her. I don't know anybody that would meet this woman today, although culture would say she falls short in so many areas. I don't know anybody that would know this woman in their personal life and not look at her as basically the bedrock of the house and the relationship she's involved in. Not as I look at it. There are an awful lot of people today who want to seek to change or undo or explain away what God has put in our inspired scriptures. But as you go here to Proverbs 31 and you look at the characteristics of what is a godly woman, what exactly does she look like, it's very clear. We can look at the traits and the characteristics which makes this woman worthy of being described as a follower of God. Let's go on over to Proverbs 31 and look how it describes this woman who, again, is described as a wife, as a mother, as a daughter. Follow along with me. I'm going to read Proverbs 31. I'm going to start in verse 10, and I'll actually read down to the end of the chapter. And then after I do that, I'm going to throw out a bunch of ways that, or traits that we see regarding her. Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeketh wool and flax, and worketh willingly with her hands. She is like the merchant's ships. She bringeth her food from afar. She riseth also while it is yet night, and giveth meat to her household, and a portion to her maidens. She considereth a field, and buyeth it. With the fruit of her hands she planteth a vineyard. She girdeth her loins with strength, and strengtheneth her arms. She perceiveth that her merchandise is good. Her candle goeth not out by night. She layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. She stretcheth out her hand to the poor, yea, she reaches forth her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. She maketh herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. Her husband is known in the gates, when he sitteth among the elders of the land. She maketh fine linen, and selleth it, and delivereth girdles unto the merchant. Strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. She looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. Her children arise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praiseth her. Many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. Favor is deceitful, and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. Very quickly, as we look through Proverbs 31, you see an awful lot of words thrown out to describe this virtuous woman, this godly woman. And we'll start with that alone. Proverbs 31:10, she's described as virtuous. You go down another verse there, verse 11, she's described as trustworthy. Verse 12, she's a doer of good. Verse 13, she's described as a worker, a hard worker. Verse 14, she's a provider. Verse 17, she's strong. Verse 20, we learn that she's kind and she's charitable to the poor and to the needy. Verse 25, she's described as being honorable. Verse 26, full of wisdom and kindness. Verse 28, blessed and she's praised from her children and her husband. Verse 29, she excels above all. Verse 30, she's one who fears the Lord. Now, as I sat and thought about this yesterday, except for maybe a few people who would have an agenda, I don't know anybody who would dare deny that this woman is exceptional in carrying out her role as a daughter and a mother and as a wife. I don't know how anybody could read this and even try to deny that she is not above and beyond pretty much what we find around us today. This is an exceptional person. This is a hard-working person that we're going to realize as we look here. And I said earlier, I think what we find here is one who is full of contentment. Not only because of herself, there's a lot at play here, and I'll touch on that even though it's not really the focus of my lesson. But as we look at this godly woman, I want you to again look at her family. She's surrounded by a godly family. And so let's focus for just a second on how hard of a worker this lady is. It says she willingly works with her hands. Proverbs 31:13. She seeketh wool and flax and worketh willingly with her hands. First thing I know about this virtuous woman, this godly woman, is she's not lazy in any way. This lady's a hard worker. Now, I know that this has been a recurring joke probably for the last 30, 40 years. We see it on sitcoms. And you guys know exactly where I'm going. When you watch a sitcom, how does it portray women who, for whatever reason, are either working out of the home or partially working at home? It's always describing them as what? Lazy, right? Those that sit on the couch, they don't do anything. That's not what we find here. Now, she works both in the home and out of the home as we look here at Proverbs 31. But this woman is a worker. She is not lazy. She's a hard worker, as a matter of fact. She's willingly working hard. Now, I've known both men and women who have worked from within the home or out of the home, where their spouse maybe worked in the outside the home and they stayed home and worked. I've known both men and women that did that. And one of the things we have to point out is when we see it here, there's nothing wrong with working outside the home, but if you're going to work in the home, you're still going to have to work. And that's what we find here. She's a hard worker. God's people have always been commanded to be hard workers, no matter where it is that you're at, no matter what role you're carrying out. Listen to 2 Thessalonians 3:10. Most of us are familiar with this. For even when we were with you, this we commanded you, that if any would not work, neither should he eat. There's always been a biblical principle for God's people to be hard workers as they provide for themselves and for their families. And that's what we find here with this virtuous woman. So no matter where it is that you are, or no matter how it is you are working, whether it's in the home, out of the home, or both, you need to be a hard worker. A hard worker. We see her hard work here actually tied even in relation to her husband. Listen to Proverbs 31:11. The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. Well, here's the point as you begin to break down a little bit what this means. Because I started to approach it a little bit differently, but let's just get the general point. She manages her affairs so well that he doesn't have to worry about whether or not the household is taken care of. And it actually says in verse 11, so that he shall have no need of spoil. Again, the idea is that she is beyond successful in managing their resources, to the point that he doesn't have to worry about acquiring more. And I'm not going to spend so much time focusing on all of her work, but we see all of the work she's doing within the house, and we see the work that she is doing outside of the house. And when you go back and you begin to look at all that she's doing, it seems that this household is either almost completely self-sufficient or at least self-sustaining. So much so to the point where this husband literally has very little to worry about. He safely trusts in her. Well, in today's world, really this would be the equivalent of a wife and a mother, again, who's working in tandem with a husband to be as efficient as possible. What I mean by that is you're doing whatever you need to do so that both of you, or so that through both of you together, the household's running efficiently. And that's going to vary a little bit, especially in today's. I had somebody tell me the other day. Let's let this sink in for just a second, guys. I had a lady at work tell me the other day. She does not have any children and she is not married, and she said that she was looking to get a second job. And I said, "You're single, aren't you? You live alone?" She said, "Yeah, but the economy is getting so bad now that I'm looking to take a second job." And here's why I'm saying that. In many of our marriages and households, what we're finding is we used to be easier to get along with one person working or maybe one in part-time. And it is getting now to the point where many families are being affected because one or both partners are working full-time and maybe working 2 jobs because the economy is getting that hard. And I go back to this here. This woman in Proverbs 31, she's a hard worker. She's working in the house. She's working outside of the home. What you're seeing here is a very effective relationship between a husband and a wife, both working together so that their household is taken care of. And we get a little more information regarding that. But the idea is this is a pretty successful home due to hard work. And let me point out something else you don't see. As hard as they're both working here, or as this is being taken care of, you see no signs of marriage struggles. You don't see any sign of divorce or any type of marriage issues going on there. It literally says she will do her husband good all his days. And I'm going to come back to the husband. But don't think for just a second she's the one pulling all of the weight here. She's doing a lot. But the only way she could do this is if she has a partner who's helping support her as she does this. And I'm going to touch on that here in a little bit. This is a very effective family that is here. She gets all the credit, and don't get me wrong, she's doing a lot. But I think if you dig deeper, you're going to find out this is a pretty effective household as far as all of the family being followers of God for this to work the way it's working. Now, considering the work of her household, let's go over to Proverbs 31, verses 14 through 19. Because you find here that you've got a couple, both husband and wife. They're both working in such a way. He has full trust in her. You can tell she's a hard worker. You can see all these things are getting done. It would be the equivalent today of a husband and wife who are both working to whatever extent they can. And if both are working outside the home, then the things inside the home are being done based on their abilities and where they're good at. For example, household items, outside, whatever. They're working in tandem. That's what we find here so far. Proverbs 31, starting in verse 14. She is like the merchant's ships. She bringeth her food from afar. She riseth also while it is yet night, and giveth meat to her household, and a portion to her maidens. She considereth a field, and buyeth it. With the fruit of her hand she planteth a vineyard. She girdeth her loins with strength, and strengtheneth her arms. She perceiveth that her merchandise is good. Her candle goeth not out by night. And she layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. Well, you can tell real quick she's a hard worker, a very hard worker. It says here that she is like merchant's ships. It's kind of interesting if you go back and spend a little bit of time thinking about that. She's taking care of her household really in a very business-like and efficient manner. It talks about her going out and considering buying a field. I don't know what I would say if I came home and my wife said, "Hey, I went and looked at the field back behind the house that's for sale. Been considering about buying it." she's thinking ahead, and she's thinking in a business-like manner. And here it uses the phrase like merchant ships. Again, she's running this household very efficiently to the point where her husband has full trust in her. And one of the things she's actually considering is buying a field. It says that she brings her food from afar. I started to think about that. We still do that today. I don't know about you, but as I thought about it, sometimes my wife has certain things she gets everywhere. This is where the afar part comes. She has to go to Aldi's, then to Costco, then back to Trader Joe's, then over to Fresh Time. By the time it's all said and done, because she gets different stuff at each place, it seems like afar. And my point is this: there's an awful lot of foresight that goes into thinking about how you're going to provide for your family. Not just financially, or what can I do? What's my side gig that I can do to make a little bit extra money? She's talking about buying a field. She's thinking about it. She's bringing her food in for the family, really in a business-like, efficient manner. It says she ariseth while it is night. She's an early riser. Some people get up really early when it's dark. Some do not do so well there. She's one who gets up when it's still early. It says she girds her loins with strength, and she's putting her hands on the spindle. Here's the point. This lady is a hard worker, very hard worker. But she also appears to have some type of business insight. And she's thinking about, what can I do to help provide for my family? And she's not just thinking only with her hands. She's thinking also with what can I do with my mind, right? How can I help provide for the family? I would say that as we look at what she is doing here, I'd say this household's doing very well because of how hard she is working and the foresight she's actually giving. Now, as a matter of fact, her work concerning her household was so effective, it basically alludes to the fact that she was prepared for whatever might come along. She's ready for it all. Proverbs 31:21, she's not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. She's got everything that she needs in the case that there's snow. The idea, again, is that she has prepared and she has put away. She knows that she has everything she needs to take care of her family. It's not just her families that she's thinking about. We see that there's others, actually. She worked to help her neighbors and to help those who were in need. And as I was sitting and thinking about this, and Jerry mentioned it even this morning, as proven by the tornado that came and tore up some of Portage last week, it is evident that there will always be those around us that for whatever reason, maybe reasons like that there are people in need. And oftentimes they are in our own neighborhoods. There are people we know. There are people who are around us. She's described as a person who saw the need being carried out or in place, and she was one who was like, I'm there, I can help fix that. I can do what I can do. Listen to Proverbs 31:20. She stretcheth out her hand to the poor, yea, she reacheth forth her hands to the needy. Let me point something out here. Here's the reason she was able to help these people who were in a position of need. It is because she was a hard worker, very hard worker. You can tell she's very frugal and businesslike, and she's thinking about how can I be prepared for my family, to take care of my family. And because she was frugal, because she was a hard worker, and because she prepared to take care of her own family, she had extra to be able to take care of someone else who was in need. And I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but it's hard to take care of somebody when you yourself don't have. This is a woman who had a lot because she's a hard worker. She had enough to provide for her family, and because she had enough to provide for them, when somebody was in need, she had the ability to help. But again, it goes back to the fact because she's a hard worker. You can't help people when you don't even have for yourself. Now and there's so much we could have talked about as far as her work. Let's spend a little bit of time talking about just her covering. And that's where I find it interesting. So we oftentimes will come to the woman here in Proverbs to talk about modesty. And yeah, we do find that about her, but I think they miss the point here quite often. They miss a couple of points here, as a matter of fact. you look at her coverings, there's two different types. One, let's talk about her inside covering. She adorns herself in two different ways. We start first from the inside, not the outside. Proverbs 31:25, strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. You know, they all come here and they talk about the modesty of the woman here in Proverbs 31. There's a reason why you would always find this woman being modest. The reason you would always find this woman here in Proverbs 31 being modest is because she covers herself with honor first. And if a woman's covering herself with honor internally first, the external part's going to follow. So we focus on the internal side first. Listen to Peter's words here in 1 Peter 3, verses 1 through 4. Likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they also may without the word be won by the conversation or manner of life of the wives, while they behold your chaste conversation coupled with fear, whose adorning let it not be that outward adorning of plaiting the hair and of wearing of gold or of putting on apparel, but let it be the hidden man of the heart, and that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God of great price. Now, there are a lot of people who teach some unusual things, and they'll basically even condemn or forbid you from wearing jewelry. And the point here is it is the secondary. The outward is the secondary. The inward is the primary. And the reason is because the outward follows the inward. If the inward part is covered in honor, the outward part will follow, right? Her outward apparel is the result of her being adorned with honor internally. Paul says this in 1 Timothy 2, 9 through 10. He says, in like manner also that women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with broided hair or gold or pearls or costly array, but which becometh women professing godliness with good works. Now here's something else I want to point out, and I don't understand it, but I will point it out. I find it interesting if you go back and you begin to do a search on modesty. Almost every article, and many of them even coming here to Proverbs 31, are focused on females. And rightly so, females should be modest. But here's the thing, the article should not be female modesty. It should be Christians' modesty, of which are both males and females. And so I began to think about this as I went back and spent some time. Why are all the articles here on females and modesty? Well, I think I got a little bit of that Friday night. Why is the main focus on women and not men? Well, the truth of the answer is this. Society has promoted the external adorning, in particular for women, over the internal. And society has made it really a primary focus for women in particular on focusing on the external, not the internal. And many women, unfortunately, do not see where their true value is. And they have been taught to believe something that is not true, and they're falling in line with it. And here's what I mean by that. Friday night, my wife and I were out. They must have been having a dance or something with the local school, because my wife and I, we couldn't even hardly hear, it was so loud. But there were young men and young women there, and here's what I found disturbing. I saw 0 young men dressed inappropriately. They all had on suits, ties, at least, dress shirts. These girls, I guess I'll ask my wife, 13 maybe, 14, nod, I can't tell, 15, 14. I had to turn my head as they walked past my table when they were leaving. I did not see any females that were dressed appropriately. None. Not one. I don't even know what to say. So again, I come back and I say, well, there's all these articles about female modesty, and rightly so. Why is there the focus? Well, the focus is because oftentimes what we're finding is many of our females are being taught by society that's what's valuable about them. And so that's what they are promoting of themselves. They think that's where their value lies, on the external, not the internal. And you might say, well, I don't think that's true, but Friday, as I looked, there was no males dressed inappropriately, but every single young female that was there was dressed inappropriately. So I see the need for it, and I see why there are so many. Again, it needs to be a focus both on males and females. Modesty is a concern for both. Unfortunately, society, I think, has done a very effective job in taking our young ladies and making them think that their value is more because of their physical nature and not their internal and spiritual. We also learn an awful lot about how she uses her language here. Proverbs 31:26, she openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. She certainly doesn't have, I think, the other day I came by and there was a lady at work who was using a bunch of profanity. We call it like trucker mouth. Like she talking like she's a trucker. That's not what you find here. This woman in Proverbs 31, this virtuous woman, this godly woman, you wouldn't find her speaking in that type of language. You wouldn't find her using hurtful, harmful words. She wouldn't be involved in gossiping and backbiting and meddling. And the reason I say that is because it says here that her tongue is bound by a law, and that law is the law of kindness. Does kindness also mean that, yes, she would be one to correct her family? Well, I'd have to read into a few things to suggest that, but when you look at her household, she runs her household to the point where her husband has nothing to fear about. So part of that law of kindness means that she, being one who loves her family, is going to find a way to basically, I don't know another way, so she's going to keep them on the straight and narrow and keep them as followers of God. And that may not always come across as kind, but that is her intent, and she's apparently finding a way to carry that out. Many people don't understand what true love is, but this is a woman, I believe, as we look here at the functioning of this household, and I'll kind of end with that. This is a household made of a bunch of faithful followers of God. Paul says in Ephesians 4:32, and be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. Peter says this in 2 Peter 1, starting in verse 5, and besides this, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge, and to knowledge temperance, and to temperance patience, and to patience godliness, and to godliness brotherly kindness, and to brotherly kindness charity or love. And let me pause. Do I think that this woman here in Proverbs 31 had this all figured out when she first started her family? Probably not, like the rest of us. But as she is being a faithful follower of God and as she is learning and gaining wisdom, I think she has not only figured this out, but she's put it into effect. Colossians 3:12 says this, put on therefore as the elect of God, holy and beloved bowels of mercies, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long-suffering. I think all of that and more is included in this household with this virtuous woman here. I'm going to again go back to Proverbs 31:10. A fairly short lesson, but as we begin to think about this, and I know you guys have looked at her before, the godly woman here in Proverbs 31:10, we could have covered a lot more. The main thing I want to go away with as we look at her as being a faithful follower of God and looking at how her household is run is her worth. And that's really what Proverbs 31:10 says. Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. How much would a man really be willing to pay to have a woman like that, who is taking care of the household, and he sees the great benefit and worth not only to himself but also to his children, and not only to his children but also to his neighbors and to those around him who are needy? How much would a person be willing to give to have a spouse like that? Today's a day where, again, mothers are, in general, being honored. And that's especially true for the wife and mother who meets the description that we're looking at here in Proverbs 31. And again, while the focus is on mothers and wives today, let me end with another basic truth. As I sat and thought about this, no wife and mother could be her best without a faithful husband and a father doing his part. Because it's the faithful husband that allows and helps his wife to reach her potential, just as it is a faithful wife who allows and helps her husband to reach his potential. We didn't really dig enough into it, but I look at this woman here in Proverbs 31, and I see how hard she is working for her family, and I see how good her family appears to be doing. And I have to say, she's got to have a husband who's meeting all the requirements on the flip side of the coin. Because if she wasn't, we would read about some of the issues there. But what we have here, this is a woman who's blessing not only her family and her spouse, but she's also being blessed by them. She's in a position where she can help those around her who are in need. I think what we see here, if we dig down deeper, is actually a God-ordained family in action. And again, that takes an awful lot of work. And you've got these children, her children being raised, watching the way a woman as a follower of God should carry themselves, whether they're sons, whether they are daughters. And I guess as I draw this to a close, that would be my thing for each of us to do right now, to ask ourselves as wives, husbands, moms, dads, daughters, sons, sisters, brothers, for each of us to look within ourselves and ask ourselves, are we meeting God's expectation in each of those areas of our lives? We could spend a little bit of time talking about her as a virtuous woman, and we can see she was a hard worker. Guys, for her to meet the criteria that's expected of her by God, she had to know that criteria. And clearly she did. She knew what was expected of her, and she's a hard worker. We each need to ask ourselves for whatever roles we're carrying out, right? Fathers, mothers, husbands, wives, brothers, sisters, whatever that role is, are you meeting the requirement? That all starts by becoming a Christian. If you're not a Christian, you're certainly not meeting that requirement, but if you're here and you're not a Christian, we'd love to study with you. It's not complicated to become a Christian. Very simple. We find the book of Acts, or the book of conversion, talks about how people became Christians. They learned about Jesus, and they had faith in who He was and why He came. They understood sin and repented of it. They confessed Christ. We have examples of that. They were immersed in water for the remission of their sins. In every conversion account, it culminates in the act of baptism. And then they have to strive to live faithfully, and that's the hard part. And again, that's where it comes back to us today. Whatever your role is, are you a husband? Are you a wife? Are you a father? Are you a mother, brother, sister, whatever that is? Are you fulfilling your role and doing it as a child of God? If there's a way that we can assist you in any way as we draw this to a close, you can come forward as we're led in a song of invitation.